Welcome. Today is Monday, May 19th, 2025. We're diving straight into a snapshot of our world today, looking at a collection of news that really tells a story about where we are right now.
Yeah, it's quite a mix today.
We've got a major budget bill moving in the U.S., some significant shifts in immigration policy, big moves in global conflicts, and, the constant drumbeat of progress in science and tech.
It really is a lot.
Our goal is to pull out what matters most and sort of connect the dots for you.
And what's immediately striking, I think, is how many of these seemingly separate stories actually weave together.
Exactly.
A decision in Congress can have implications for international relations, and a scientific discovery might influence business trends. It's all, interconnected.
Let's start in Washington then with the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, this massive piece of legislation over 1,100 pages. That's huge.
Right.
It's huge. It's the administration's big push on its agenda. It just barely made it through a House committee vote, but it exposed some real fault lines within the Republican Party.
That close vote really highlights the internal dynamics, doesn't it? The Freedom Caucus, a more conservative group within the Republicans known for, focusing on lower spending and less government.
Right.
They're pushing for much sharper cuts and immediate work requirements for Medicaid. This shows a fundamental debate within the party about the scope and role of government, really.
Exactly. And the bill itself is just packed with proposals. On the tax side, it looks like the 2017 tax cuts are likely to stick around.
For individuals and corporations, yeah.
And there are new potential breaks for things like tips, overtime, even interest on loans for cars assembled right here in the U.S.
Interesting detail on the car loans.
We might also see a jump in the standard deduction for couples filing jointly, a temporary increase in the child tax credit, and some extra help for lower-income seniors.
And the SALT deduction cap.
That too. The cap on the state and local tax deduction, which is important for people in states with higher taxes, might also go up.
Okay. But while some of these tax changes could offer maybe short-term relief for certain people, there's skepticism from analysts about the bigger picture.
How so?
Well, the concern is that the bill might not actually pay for itself, potentially leading to a larger national debt. They point to the fact that, relying on predictions of strong economic growth to offset the costs is often a risky bet.
Right. That sounds familiar.
This could have long-term consequences for the economy as a whole.
And then we get into the social safety net programs, which is where things get really interesting and, frankly, pretty controversial.
Yeah, this is a big part of it.
The bill proposes over $1 trillion in cuts to Medicaid and SNAMP. That's the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Food stamps, basically over the next decade.
$1 trillion. Wow.
There are stricter work requirements being proposed for Medicaid, and there's even a suggestion that people with homes valued over $1 million could become ineligible.
$1 million home value cutoff for Medicaid. That's quite a change.
Yeah. And SNAP could also see states footing a much larger portion of the bill, and work requirements would be expanded.
The potential impact on people's lives here is significant. The Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, they provide independent analysis,
Right.
They estimate that millions could lose Medicaid coverage. And changes to SNAP could also make it harder for vulnerable families to afford food. These are policy shifts with very real-world consequences for you listening.
Then there's a huge $350 billion earmarked for the deportation agenda and a boost to the Pentagon.
$350 billion.
That includes more funding for the border wall, more Border Patrol and ICE agents, and this Golden Dome missile shield concept. There are even some unique proposals like MAGA accounts for newborns and a tax on the endowments of very large universities.
When we look at the bill as a whole, the priorities become quite clear, don't they? A significant focus on border security and defense, coupled with a move to reduce spending on social programs.
Yeah, definitely a shift.
And the inclusion of something like the tax on university endowments also signals an intention to address specific areas of concern for the administration.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, but still in politics. On a more personal note, there's news that former President Joe Biden has been diagnosed with an aggressive form of prostate cancer that has unfortunately spread.
Yes, that's very serious news.
President and First Lady Trump have offered their well wishes, and this has, understandably, reignited discussions about how much the public should know about the health of political leaders.
Absolutely. This situation reminds us of the human side of politics and the potential impact that a leader's health can have. It naturally brings up questions about transparency and, the balance between a leader's right to privacy and the public's need to know.
Right. It's a tough balance. Now, shifting to the international stage, President Trump has reportedly had separate phone calls with both Putin and Zelensky,
Okay, what about...
with the aim of finding a way to end the conflict in Ukraine. He's announced that negotiations for a ceasefire and a resolution to the war are intended to begin immediately.
Immediately. Wow.
And there's even talk of the Vatican potentially hosting these discussions. Both Zelensky and Putin have apparently acknowledged these efforts.
This is a potentially significant diplomatic development. The fact that both sides seem willing to engage in talks, even if facilitated by a third party, could indicate a shift in the conflict.
Could be.
But, the path to a lasting peace is still incredibly complex and faces many, many obstacles.
No doubt. We've also seen some other legislative and political moves. The Take It Down Act has been signed into law.
What's that one do?
It makes it a federal crime to post non-consensual explicit images, including those AI deepfakes, those really realistic fake videos or images.
Oh, right. Important.
Platforms will also have to remove such content within 48 hours. Also, a judge has blocked the dismantling of the U.S. Institute of Peace. And questions are being raised about the Attorney General's sale of Trump media stock around the time the tariff plan was announced. Potential conflict of interest, maybe.
That timing is interesting. Raises eyebrows.
Oh, and there's a controversial part of that big tax bill we mentioned. It proposes a 10-year federal preemption of state and local AI regulation.
Oh, that's huge. Blocking states from regulating AI for 10 years.
Yeah, and it's facing pushback from state governments, understandably.
That attempt to preempt state AI regulation is a key point of contention. It really highlights the ongoing debate about who should be setting the rules for these powerful new technologies and, the potential for federal policy to override local concerns.
Okay, let's turn our attention now to immigration. The Supreme Court has ruled that the administration can proceed with terminating temporary protected status, or TPS.
Right, for Venezuelans.
For around 350,000 Venezuelans,
Yeah.
It reverses a lower court's decision. Justice Jackson dissented, and critics are warning that this could lead to a mass illegalization of people.
And TPS, just to remind listeners, is that temporary status granted to people from countries facing conditions that prevent their safe return.
Exactly.
So this decision will have significant consequences for the individuals and families affected, putting them at serious risk of deportation. Justice Jackson's dissent likely focused on concerns about the humanitarian implications and whether the conditions in Venezuela truly allow for safe return.
And in another legal development related to immigration, the Supreme Court blocked the use of the Alien Enemies Act to expel Venezuelan detainees in Texas.
The Alien Enemies Act from 1798.
That's the one. They cited a lack of proper legal process. However, the broader question of using this old law against transnational criminal organizations is now heading to the appeals court.
Wow. Applying a law from 1798 to current immigration matters raises some fundamental legal and ethical questions, definitely.
They're also hearing reports of the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, requesting a large deployment of the National Guard for immigration enforcement actions.
20,000 troops, I saw. That's a lot. And even considering a reality TV show where immigrants compete for citizenship.
A reality TV show? Seriously?
Yeah.
That's certainly a novel and potentially controversial approach.
To say the least. And that one big beautiful bill also contains some pretty far-reaching immigration proposals.
Like what?
Including a $1,000 fee just to apply for asylum, a stated goal of removing 1 million immigrants each year, and a 5% tax on money sent abroad by non-citizens, remittances.
A tax on remittances.
Yeah.
And 1 million deportations a year goal.
Yeah. There's even discussion about potentially suspending habeas corpus, that fundamental right protecting against unlawful detention for migrants, arguing that there is an invasion at the border.
Suspending habeas corpus, that's extreme.
Yeah.
These proposed measures collectively signal a significant shift towards stricter immigration enforcement and could have a wide-ranging impact.
Absolutely.
The framing of immigration as a national security threat, or securitization, often underpins these types of policies, but it risks, xenophobia and eroding legal protections. We're also seeing changes at the state level. Illinois is considering ending a health program for some immigrants under 65.
While keeping it for older immigrants.
Right. And California has frozen enrollment in its immigrant health care program.
But interestingly, there are studies suggesting that these kinds of programs can actually save hospitals money in the long run by reducing the need for uncompensated emergency care.
That's a key point. At the border, CBP is expanding global entry hours at some offices and reporting significant seizures of drugs, like cocaine.
So enforcement actions continue alongside these policy shifts.
Seems so. Okay, turning to the economy, it's presenting a bit of a mixed picture, wouldn't you say?
Definitely mixed. Stock markets had seen gains recently, but then Moody's, one of the major credit rating agencies, downgraded the U.S. credit rating.
Right, for Moda, citing concerns about the sustainability of the national debt. But the markets today have been relatively stable despite that.
Yeah, the market's reaction has been somewhat muted so far. This could be because investors had already anticipated this kind of move, or maybe other factors like the potential for government spending through that budget bill are having a bigger influence right now.
We also have a 90-day truce on some tariffs with China.
Some tariffs reduced, yeah. But that significant tariff on imports linked to fentanyl remains in place. Shows how trade policy can be used for other national priorities.
Good point. Recent economic data also gives us pause, though. Housing starts and building permits were lower than expected in April.
And consumer confidence.
Wow.
Wow. The University of Michigan survey hit its lowest point in history in the preliminary May reading.
Lowest ever. That's concerning.
It is. Inflation did show a slight decrease, but the growth in retail sales really slowed down.
So it's this interesting disconnect between a market that seems okay, maybe buoyed by the trade truce or stimulus hopes,
Right.
and some underlying economic indicators, low confidence, housing weakness, retail slowdown, the credit downgrade that are raising concerns.
That divergence is definitely something to keep an eye on. Low consumer confidence, especially when coupled with rising expectations for future inflation, can be a sign of potential challenges ahead. Slower retail sales could mean consumers are getting more cautious.
All right, let's talk crypto. In the world of cryptocurrencies, things are looking quite optimistic, at least in some projections.
Yeah, Bitcoin is being projected to potentially exceed $110,000 by June of next year. That's a big number.
It is. We're seeing a lot of activity in the fintech space around digital assets, companies merging, acquiring each other, new investment funds launching tied to digital tokens.
And even talk of some governments considering holding Bitcoin as part of their strategic reserves. That's potentially a big shift, showing growing geopolitical importance.
But as always with crypto, security remains a concern, right?
Absolutely. Reports of hacks, illicit activities on online marketplaces like that Shinbi guarantee thing using USDT, and those rug pull scams where developers just vanish with the money. High incidence on Solana, apparently.
Still the Wild West in some ways.
The increasing interest from established financial institutions is significant, but these ongoing security challenges highlight the need for more robust regulations and security protocols in the digital asset space to protect investors.
And big businesses are also paying close attention to the proposed changes in that one big, beautiful bill.
Especially the extension of corporate tax cuts and that provision for 100% immediate depreciation on new investments.
Right. Business organizations are largely expressing support, seeing these measures as potential catalysts for expansion and job creation. Airlines for America, for instance, is noting potential benefits for FAA modernization.
But there are concerns being raised about whether these incentives are funded responsibly, the potential for longer-term economic imbalances if they rely on cuts to other programs or just increase the national debt.
So the question is whether it leads to real productivity gains.
Exactly. Or just a strategic reallocation of resources to take advantage of tax benefits. The long-term impact depends on that.
Okay, let's switch over to the world of sports now. Big news in the NBA.
Yeah.
The Oklahoma City Thunder are heading to the Western Conference Finals. First time in about a decade. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander put on a show in Game 7 against the Nuggets, scored 35.
Wow, SGA stepping up. Good for OKC. Jokic must be disappointed.
Yeah, he reflected on their title contention ability. And Michael Malone, the Nuggets coach, is actually joining ESPN for the West Finals coverage.
Interesting move.
Also, there's a potential Game 7 tonight in the Eastern Conference semifinals between the Knicks and the Celtics. That could be huge. Conference finals start May 22nd.
Should be good. And I saw Aaron Gordon advocating for more rest days in the playoffs.
Yeah, due to fatigue-related injuries, it's a constant discussion.
It is. In the NFL, the Philadelphia Eagles have extended head coach Nick Sirianni's contract.
Digging around.
And they rehired Joe Douglas, the former Jets GM, in a senior scouting role.
Back to Philly. And the debate about potentially banning the tush-push play for safety reasons continues.
That's not going away anytime soon, is it? That play is so divisive.
Nope. Okay, international soccer. The Copa Libertadores group stage has seen some important results. Things are getting tight there. Final group matches are May 27th, 29th.
Lots of action. River Plate had a big win. Flamengo, too.
Yep. The Champions League final is set. Inter Milan versus Paris Saint-Germain. May 31st in Munich.
Inter beat Barcelona, PSG beat Arsenal. Should be a great final.
Definitely. And the major European leagues just wrapped up their seasons. Premier League had its final day. La Liga saw some teams secure European spots, others avoid relegation. And Napoli and Inter Milan's title decider games in Serie A are coming up soon.
Right. Napoli just 1 point ahead. That'll be tense.
Formula One was at Imola for the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix this past weekend.
How'd that do?
Max Verstappen of Red Bull took the victory. No huge surprise there. But McLaren had a strong showing. Lando Norris finished second. Oscar Piastri third.
Piastri started on pole, though, right? So he lost places.
He did, yeah. Ended his 3-race win streak from pole. Disappointing home race for Ferrari, though. Hamilton and Leclerc outside the top 10.
Ouch for Ferrari. But McLaren's performance suggests they might be closing the gap on Red Bull a bit.
Maybe. Next up is the prestigious Monaco Grand Prix later this week.
Oh, is it classic?
In combat sports, UFC has a Fight Pass Invitational grappling event coming up May 29th. Figan Davies versus Adele Fornerino is the main event.
Got it. And Patchy Mix signed with UFC.
Yep, making his debut at UFC 316 against Mario Bautista. And Michael Morales got a TKO win over Gilbert Burns this past weekend.
Morales keeps rolling. Busy time in MMA.
In boxing, some notable fights scheduled soon. Josh Taylor versus Ikal Esselman in Glasgow on May 24th, and Jayo Pitaya fighting in June.
And always those rumors of mega fights, Canelo Crawford, Usyk Dubois.
Always simmering. Okay, let's turn to science and medicine. The World Health Organization, the WHO, is facing a significant financial crunch.
Yeah, funding cuts from the U.S. and other European nations are hitting them hard.
Director General Tedros is defending their $2.1 billion annual budget request as extremely modest, considering the global health challenges they face.
And this funding shortage could impact their ability to respond to pandemics, COVID-19, polio, Ebola, you name it.
Member states are expected to discuss a potential 20% increase in their annual dues at the current World Health Assembly.
That would help. There's also an international pandemic treaty being worked on to improve global preparedness and response equitable access to tests, treatments, vaccines.
But the U.S. is not part of those negotiations or signing.
Correct, which is noteworthy given the global nature of pandemics. It highlights the intersection of politics, funding, and global health.
Meanwhile, researchers in Chicago are conducting a large 5-year study on urban flooding in the Chatham neighborhood.
Funded by the Department of Energy, they're looking at sewer overload, aging drainage, impervious surfaces, and climate change, more intense rainfall.
Using AI for prediction, too. And residents are implementing local solutions like rain gardens.
It really links climate change directly to urban health and viability.
Also, a global study highlighted the potential for saving lives 1.9 million by 2040 and preventing 1.4 million new childhood asthma cases globally.
How?
By reducing emissions from road transport through stricter standards, the EV transition, and cleaner electricity.
And ensuring those EVs are powered by clean energy is crucial, right? Could prevent another couple 100,000 premature deaths.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We already mentioned the sad update on former President Biden's cancer diagnosis.
Yes.
And tragically, there was a bombing at a fertility clinic in Palm Springs. A suspect was killed, others injured. The FDA is investigating it as intentional terrorism.
That's horrific. Targeting a fertility clinic, deeply disturbing.
It is. Sadly, the world continues to grapple with conflict. The Israeli offensive in Gaza escalated significantly over the weekend.
Hundreds of Palestinians killed, including journalists, forced evacuation of Jan Yunus, over 300 deaths since Thursday. The last operating hospital in northern Gaza closed. Just devastating reports.
And after an 11-week blockade that worsened famine conditions, Israel is now set to allow limited food entry.
Limited entry after all that time. International pressure is mounting protests in London, The Hague, even Italian lawmakers at the Rafah crossing.
A White House envoy presented a new agreement proposal. Indirect talks resumed, but apparently with little progress. Hamas still demands a lasting ceasefire and full Israeli withdrawal.
And the U.S. denied any plan to relocate Gazans to Libya.
Correct. Meanwhile, U.S. university students continue hunger strikes in solidarity. The whole situation is just incredibly fraught.
Deeply concerning, yes. The humanitarian toll is immense.
In Ukraine,
Yeah.
alongside those potential peace talks we mentioned,
Right, the Trump calls.
Russia launched its largest drone attack against Ukraine since the invasion began. Fatalities in the Kyiv region and a Russian attack on a civilian evacuation minibus in Sumy killed 9 people.
So the violence continues intensely, even with talk of talks.
But there's also been a humanitarian development. Russia and Ukraine reportedly agreed to exchange 1,000 prisoners each.
1,000 each. That's a significant exchange. The first direct peace talks result since the war began. even without a ceasefire agreement yet.
Yeah. Interesting diplomatic layer. U.S. Defense Secretary Hegseth reportedly paused U.S. Cyber Command operations against Russia, maybe as a negotiating tactic.
Using cyber ops as leverage. And the U.S. is apparently going to begin discussions on potential troop reduction in Europe later this year.
Lots of moving parts there.
The situation remains incredibly complex and volatile. That prisoner exchange is positive, but the conflict's devastation continues.
And other conflicts grind on. In Syria, Saudi Arabia and Qatar helped pay off some World Bank debt, potentially enabling renewed collaboration. Unconfirmed reports of rare direct talks between Israeli and Syrian officials, too.
Interesting, if true.
Sudan is facing a catastrophic humanitarian crisis. Port Sudan, a relative refuge, was hit by explosions and fire attributed to RSF drone attacks.
Affecting fuel depots, the airport, power plant. And the Sudanese government broke diplomatic ties with the UAE, accusing them of arming the RSF. Drone warfare is intensifying there.
It's considered the world's worst current humanitarian crisis. Just awful.
Truly devastating.
Myanmar is also seeing increased conflict and a worsening humanitarian situation after a coordinated offensive by resistance groups led to intensified military airstrikes on civilians. A recent earthquake complicates things further.
Right, impacting aid and maybe even the Army's ammo production. The UN criticized the Army for violating a humanitarian truce during earthquake recovery.
And in Ethiopia, a violent power struggle in the Tigray region threatens a new civil war, potentially involving Eritrea again. Conflict in the Amhara region, too, trapping pacifist communities, internet blocked there. Alarming reports of mass violence.
The sheer number of ongoing conflicts and humanitarian crises globally is deeply troubling. Complex situations needing urgent diplomacy and aid.
Shifting to religion now. Pope Leo XIV recently held a special audience at the Vatican.
What was the focus?
Emphasizing interreligious dialogue and Christian unity. He reaffirmed commitment to both, seeking full communion among Christians and constructive dialogue among all religions.
Important timing with the 1700th anniversary year of the Council of Nicaea.
Exactly. He mentioned the significance of that, the formulation of the shared creed. He plans to travel to Iznik, Turkey, ancient Nicaea, for a commemoration, following plans Pope Francis had.
A significant gesture towards unity.
He also stressed continuing Pope Francis's commitment to synodality in the Catholic Church and ecumenically, and highlighted the importance of fraternity among religious leaders for peace, especially now.
Addressing Jewish and Muslim representatives specifically.
Yes, with special gratitude. Committed to continuing dialogue from Nostra Aetate 60 years ago, he mentioned the special relationship with Judaism and the importance of growing Christian-Muslim dialogue based on mutual respect and freedom of conscience.
Sounds like setting a clear tone early in his pontificate. Lots of key religious leaders were present too.
Right. Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew, Patriarch Theophilos III of Jerusalem, representatives from Anglican, Methodist, Lutheran, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Sikh, and Jain communities. His inaugural Mass yesterday drew a huge crowd, too.
A message of love and unity, I imagine.
That was the theme. Okay, technology and AI. Beyond that, proposed federal preemption of state AI regulation in the tax bill.
Which faces significant hurdles in the Senate and opposition from states, by the way. California tried AI safety measures before. Montana's active in tech policy. Big tension there.
Right. Google confirmed a bug in their Google Ads platform.
What happened?
It affected the new customer acquisition bidding strategy, causing campaigns to stop spending budgets starting May 15th. They say it's fully mitigated as of this morning, though.
Advertisers must have been scrambling. Those platforms are complex.
And a recent report from Pixelate indicates that hundreds of U.S.-based mobile apps might be violating COPI, the children's online privacy law.
Collecting kids' personal info without proper consent. Sharing location data? That's serious.
Yeah, apparently 79% of the ad-supported apps lacked the specific child privacy disclosure COPIA requires.
That raises serious ethical and legal concerns. Needs looking into.
And one more tech item. A report claims New Orleans police secretly used facial recognition cameras for surveillance.
Secretly. Without public awareness or consent. That's a major privacy issue.
Definitely raises questions. Okay, let's wrap up with the automotive industry. Lots of new models and updates.
Always something new. Honda CR-V, Hybrid Trail Sport, Infiniti QX60 getting updates, Toyota RAV4 teaser.
Dodge Charger EV, Audi ending the Q8 e-tron but working on a successor, GMC Hummer EV getting upgrades, Lexus RZ, Toyota CHR returning as an EV, Hyundai Ioniq 9, large EV SUV.
And a Lotus Emira Clark edition honoring the F1 legend. Busy times.
The EV transition remains a major focus, obviously, and that global study we mentioned earlier really underscores the potential health benefits save lives, fewer asthma cases from smart emission policies, EV adoption, and clean electricity.
Remembering that ensuring EVs don't just shift emissions to the power grid is key to maximizing those benefits.
Right. The electric two-wheeler market is also projected to grow massively. On the policy side, the OBBB bill seeks to eliminate EV tax credits.
That's a significant potential policy reversal. Meanwhile, Mercedes developed a solution for its CLA EV to use more common 400V chargers, and new GM battery cells could lower future EV prices.
Manufacturer news. Hyundai executives named to Automotive News' leading women list. Tariffs are forcing Honda to build more CR-Vs in the U.S. Ford's raising prices, Volvo's boosting U.S. hybrid production. Nissan might move central production here too.
Tariffs really reshaping manufacturing footprints, and driverless trucks are already hauling freight in Texas.
Apparently so. Also records of millions in parts stolen from Ford factories, the EPA possibly tweaking stop-start tech rules, and Colorado looking to legalize those tiny key cars.
Key cars. Interesting. Lots happening in the auto world.
Finally, let's bring it home to our local Madison, Wisconsin news. The search unfortunately continues for a missing boater on Lake Monona after a vessel capsized Friday night.
Tragic situation. Hope they find them soon.
There was an arrest on a Madison Metro bus for an alleged assault on the driver over a fare, and a SWAT team was involved in an arrest of a Janesville man with active drug trafficking warrants.
Keeping busy, law enforcement.
Dane County is breaking ground today on a new public safety communications center, the 911 dispatch facility. It'll have geothermal heating and cooling.
Good investment in infrastructure.
The Southeast Sidewalk Plan Survey is open. A new mural called Colorful Characters was installed in South Madison. And Low Mo May is underway delaying lawn cutting enforcement until June to help pollinators.
Ah, yes, Low Mo May. Good for the bees.
Spring yard waste collection is done, so residents need to use drop-off sites now. The city celebrated planting its 100,000th street tree. Lots of infrastructure projects ongoing. Water main flushing starts today.
Sounds like a lot of positive community initiatives.
Also, Chad Ruppel named new housing director for the Community Development Authority. Allegations against the city's civil rights director continue. And Wisconsin child care families and providers participated in the National Day Without Child Care, advocating for state investment.
How did that go?
Republicans on the Joint Finance Committee voted against nearly $500 million to make the Child Care Counts program permanent. Estimates suggest a quarter of the state's child care businesses could close without that funding.
That's a huge potential impact on families and the economy.
On the lighter side, film releases like Final Destination, Bloodlines opened well, lots of music and video game releases this month too. Doom, Dark Ages came out, Elden Ring, Night Rain is coming.
Always new entertainment. And The Voice finale is tonight.
Right. For local events this week in Madison, Mallard's baseball games. Music by Monona Wednesday, Brat Fest this weekend, Vegan Sausage Fest Saturday, Nature Passport launch Saturday, plus various public meetings on planning, fiber, housing.
Plenty to do around town.
So what does all of this mean as we head into the rest of your Monday? Today's news really paints a picture of a world in constant motion, doesn't it? Significant policy debates, ongoing conflicts, the relentless advancement of technology and science. It's a lot to keep up with.
It is, and considering how these different areas intersect is really key, I think. How do domestic policy choices influence our role on the global stage? How do technological advancements reshape our economy and, well, our society? These are the kinds of questions to keep in mind.
Yeah. This has been a quick dip into the major headlines, just scratching the surface, really. We encourage you to explore the stories that sparked your interest further. What stood out most to you today?
Because there are always deeper layers to uncover and different perspectives to consider. It's worth digging in.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive. Until then, have a good week. Goodbye.